Hello and welcome to Ask an Expert. This is our fourth episode. My name is Alexandra Dietrich, and Heather Gallagher and I have been exploring different topics in the arts community that have either impacted us all or impacted a specific part of being an independent artist in the arts world. We represent NEMPAC, which is an acronym for the North End Music and Performing Arts Center. We're located in Boston's North End, and under that umbrella, we do many different disciplines in the arts, and one of them focuses on our opera project and working with vocalists from and not from the greater Boston area. So we're so excited. Today we are joined by Zach Finkelstein, and he is originally from Boston. So welcome back virtually, Zach.
Thanks, y'all.
And we're very excited to hear what you've been working on in the now COVID era of music. But also, I just want to do a little shopkeeping for in terms of those who haven't participated in a Zoom discussion before. You're totally welcome to have your camera on or off. It's up to you. I do ask that you mute your end. And at the end of today's forum discussion, we will have an open question and answer session. So we do have a chat box right at the bottom. And if you have a question that you know you might forget later, just throw it down in the chat. And when we get to the Q&A session, we will jump into your questions in the order that they are received. So I'm going to pass things over to Heather.
All right. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And Zach, thank you for joining us as well. I'm just going to launch off. I'm going to read a little bit about Zach's biography. We're very happy to have him this evening. He has performed as a tenor, concert, and opera soloist for the past 9 years, from Seattle's Benaroya Hall to New York's Lincoln Center to London's Sadler Wells to the National Arts Center in Beijing, China. Hailed by Anthony Tomasini of the New York Times as a compelling tenor, stage credits include the New York City Opera, Opera Grand Rapids, and Pacific Northwest Ballet. In the past 5 years, Zach has sung 32 performances of Handel's Messiah with 14 orchestras, including the Virginia Symphony, the Florida Orchestra, and the Calgary Philharmonic. Recently, he toured the Spanish new music opera Comala with the Zon Collective from Guadalajara, Mexico to Chicago, Illinois. Zach is on the roster of several pro-choral groups, including Conspirare, True Concord, and the Santa Fe Desert Chorale. Zach released his first album, Britain and Peers, The Canticles, in 2017, and he's releasing his second album this summer, Dark is Yonder Town, featuring guitarist Dieter Hennings-Yeomans and new compositions by Ricardo Zonmuldoon and Jesse Jones. His last pre-COVID performance was as a Bach soloist with the Seattle Symphony on March 7, 2020. He lost 11 concert, opera, and pro-choral contracts in 2020 to force majeure. In his dual career, Zach has worked full-time for 8 years as a research manager for Innovative Research Group, a Canadian public affairs and corporate communication firm, managing clients and analyzing data in the nonprofit, arts, health, infrastructure, and political sectors. Innovative has provided Zach with the flexibility and financial stability to pursue a long-term singing career his own way, and for that, he is forever grateful. Zach Finkelstein is, according to teacher-writer Chris Foley of the Collaborative Piano blog, one of the strongest advocates for the artist in society and their never-ending challenge to make an honest living. He currently serves as the Northwest Soloist Representative to the AGMA Board of Governors, as well as on the AGMA Finance and Budget Committee, and as a Vice Chair of the Pacific Northwest Area AGMA Committee. And he is a member of the core group in the AGMA Soloist Coalition. Zach is also the founder, editor, and lead writer of the website The Middleclass Artist, an independent journalism site for artists and arts advocacy, which has been praised by none other than Alex Ross of The New Yorker for its assiduously well-informed and keen reporting. Zach is represented by Dean Artist Management and holds an artist diploma voice from the Royal Conservatory of Music's Glenn Gould School in Toronto and a Bachelor of Arts in Honors in Political Science from McGill University in Montreal. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're so happy to have you, Zach.
Thanks for having me and enacting my worst nightmare, which is reading my bio out loud to a group of people.
I know, it's mortifying, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I'm like, oh, gonna cut that next time. Gonna cut that. Might cut that down. Yeah.
So, so at this particular point, I'm gonna throw the ball over to your court, Alex, if that's okay with you.
Of course. So, Zach, I came
Great.
across your work in a way that wasn't necessarily what I would expect for someone who was singing in Boston at the same time that I was singing in Boston. We never crossed paths in a gig, but I started to see, just like you, when like there was one day where you had gigs lined up throughout this season, maybe next season, beyond, and then right in the middle of March, for me it was March 14th, they were all gone, except for like maybe one or two, and then like maybe a week later, those were gone. And so coming in for our audience, not necessarily living a life of independent contractoring, can you speak a little bit to just how, as a professional musician, as a professional tenor, you structure out your year in terms of contracts?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I wrote a piece in early March about force majeure that got picked up in kind of all on social media about what you just described, which is that we put a lot of risk in our contracts. We don't get paid up front, and we get paid at the end of it. And everyone can walk away from the contract, but let's just be clear: the artists are clearly the people that are affected the most by that. I mean, no artist in the right mind is going to declare force majeure on, the Chicago Symphony. So yeah, and as an artist, we structure our contracts years in advance. I had things up through 2022. I'm not sure if they're still there. Some of the 2021 things might be in 2022. Some of the 2020 things might be in 2021. Some of them might be disappeared. We don't know. But yeah, we structure our contracts years in advance. We learn roles unpaid on our own time. We pay for our own scores. We pay for our own coachings. We pay for our own teachings. All our materials and lessons are on our own time. And so we show up 99.999% prepared for everything, with everything memorized and in our best suit, which we also pay for, or fancy dress or gown. And yeah, that's kind of how it works. We get paid at the end, and we structure out years in advance. So, when something happens to like a season of the year, say the summer or the spring, that can cause a lot of damage, especially for singers like myself, who are primarily seasonal singers. I set up my life in a way where I don't do a ton of travel, but basically from March to May, I'm gone, and November, December, I'm gone, and I take the summer off. I still work my dual career job as a market research manager. But as someone with a young son, I make sure to basically compress as much as I physically can, and then either just stop applying for things or saying no, which I know is a privilege. But I'm 9 years in. I'm hoping I can say no to things at this point. So that's kind of how I structure my thing. So when you say March, it was like to May. And it was like watching one of those YouTube or TikToks where someone releases a ball and all the dominoes fall and it hits something and it kicks you in the butt or something. I mean, it was pretty brutal. I know it was brutal for a lot of people. But for me personally, because my contracts are primarily at this point concert work, like with symphonies, Handel's Messiah, you show up on a Wednesday, you fly in, you do heat up and serve on Thursday, Friday night's the show, you go home Sunday. Whereas an opera company, I mean, the rehearsal processes are much longer, different set of structures. But one of the reasons I don't do opera as much anymore is partially because of that structure with a young child. So, for me, I had a bunch of 6-day contracts in a row, and they all disappeared. So that was 11 through June, all disappeared. And only one of them paid me in full, which was Controversies, who Craig Johnson is a boss. I love Craig Johnson. But, some of them some of them sent a very apologetic letter, and I had a nice back and forth with the artistic director, and we were all very sorry about it. And you could tell, he's in the band or she's in the band, and we're all just mourning it. And some I got just like a note from my agent that said, your services are no longer needed, and you don't have to get on a plane in 2 days, and no word from that organization. So, I mean, it really varied company to company, and we're still not sure how it's going to end up. Because of, as I said, force majeure in our contracts, there's this gray area that people are probably illegally doing right now, which is canceling things next, February or March due to, force majeure or whatever, when we don't know what's going to happen, but I think they're maybe just a little bit worried about what's going to happen. And it looks like nothing's going to be able to happen. So they just kind of pull the plug and everyone kind of walks away. So yeah, that's kind of how an artist's contract are structured in the current landscape. I don't know, if anyone says they know exactly how it's going to go moving forward. I think they are, maybe not full of the truth. But we can make some pretty good predictions, which is, we're definitely, it's not even a prediction anymore. We're not going to work in the fall in person. And so that effectively means from March to December, almost all artist income has been wiped out. So, do you know a lot of your friends who can have 9 months of income wiped out and just kind of like get up and pretend nothing happened? It's devastating. And we're not able to deal with it effectively on a lot of levels in this country, and it's very frustrating. So that's kind of where we're at.
I love that you touched upon several terms that are so important for discussing your work at Middleclass Artist, and the first of which, just to make sure that everyone watching understands, is that force majeure is a clause that has very different ways of being worded in an independent contract that allows a company the ability to cancel the contract with potentially zero payment of the promised amount, maybe a percentage, maybe a promise to reprogram. It really depends company to company. But as Zach mentioned, we started to see a fallout where many companies were canceling the rest of their spring season. Some artists started to hear, we're going to try and put it on next year's season, which meant that if next year's season had already been planned, then that season had to be moved out, and started to see this movement and replacement effect go on. Now, the other part that you touched upon, which is the dual career aspect, is that not every singer is made the same. So I've heard dual career. I've also heard correlating career as interchangeable terminology. I think that it's so important to recognize that in today's day and age of being a professional musician, that the era of potentially supporting yourself completely independently from gigs is not financially feasible for every artist. So can you speak just a little bit to, and you mentioned this in your article, The Road Ahead, what are some of those correlating careers, those dual careers that are also being wiped out right now because of the pandemic that frequently artists have as a cushion of their income?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think of it as kind of an ecosystem of art, an artist supports a lot of people. They support coaches, they support teachers, students, universities. We're all interconnected in a very serious way. So when one of those people's income is gone, it affects everything else. So just within the music economy, a lot of teaching jobs are going to be, not potentially removed, but shifted in a way that can reduce income, maybe to an adjunct, or I saw something that someone's posted, an adjunct associate professor job, which I don't know what that is. Everything's adjunct, basically. So, when people's finances are more insecure, they're less likely to spend on what we would consider essential purchases, but which to a large part of the society is not as essential. Your voice lessons for your son or daughter, soccer camp, like those are the things outside of your basic hierarchy of needs are going to get cut, right? So, we're in a little bit of trouble there in that artists often are, pretty much to a T, almost all singers are teachers. I would say I'm one of the exceptions, but the only reason for that is I already had a career before singing. But many singers are also teachers. So, who's taking lessons? Singers. So, if the singer doesn't have any income from the gig, they can't pay the teacher, and vice versa. So, and if the teacher's job is impacted at a school and all of a sudden she's in the open market, all of a sudden you have, Met Stars opening up as independent voice teacher studios, doing free consultations with someone who just sang, Brunhilde at Chicago Lyric or something. So, everyone is affected. We're essentially on like a global competition scale right now. And, our ability to earn income as artists, you know, it's easy to say, oh, well, I'll just sing, you know, any way I can to try and make a living. But we do rely on those institutions to, you know, market for us, to prepare videos, materials, to development. They have the list. So, you know, a huge chunk of what makes a company so important is we don't have access to. So you see a lot of little blips and blops all over the internet right now, you know, donation buttons and, you know, maybe they're just starting to have pay buttons, I think. You know, 3 months into the problem, everyone's like, oh, well, now we have to get paid. But, you know, there's like someone who sings at the Met just did a recital where the suggested donation was $7.99 or something. So I mean, how can I, like, I've been sitting on my second album for like 2 months. It's been ready, but I'm just like, I have no idea how to release it in this environment where everyone's working for free. No one's paying for singing. The fees we're getting are offered are 10 cents on the dollar to do online stuff or no fee. And artists don't really know how to market themselves necessarily without the help of institutions. So so that's kind of how like the music economy's been impacted a little. Like you take money out, it affects everybody. And then what Dana calls correlating careers and I call dual careers, you know, a lot of singer dual careers are in, say, retail, the restaurant industry, service jobs, and those were highly impacted as well. You know, if you're in lockdown, you can't necessarily go to a restaurant, and that's just starting to open up again. But you know, in the first couple months, March, April, people were getting furloughed left and right. So you know, there's a lot of challenges to an artist making a living in general, and when our other careers are threatened, it's even more difficult.
I think that that's so important to highlight. I know that the restaurant industry almost went through a complete release of employment, and a lot of the mindset behind that in the restaurant world was that allowed their employees to then be able to file for unemployment, which depending on which state you were in, didn't necessarily kick in instantly and sometimes meant dozens, hundreds, thousands of phone calls into an office. So then that brings us to the Middleclass Artist, which I'm so excited exists, because I think that these are dialogues that need to occur, especially at a younger age in artists training and life. I think that many of us of the same generation came up at a time when our teachers were like of the impresario idea, which was like, you were going to get trained, you were going to meet somebody who was going to just give you money to fund your career, and then you were going to sing from house to house and maybe in Europe. And now I think that we see in a reality as I work at a university that I want all of my university students to understand the structure that exists. And what I loved when I first came across your Middleclass Artist work was just a blanket acknowledgement of which companies paid out their contracts, which ones paid partial, which ones took in fundraising to maybe give some amount to these artists that were struggling, and without naming company names, which companies potentially canceled their programming on social media before contacting their artists, which if you're not of this world or you're partially in this world, is such an insult to relationships that you spend years developing, and to learn that you're unemployed via Twitter. Like what? So I would love for you to tell us a little bit about the inception point and the inspiration for Middleclass Artist. And I put a link to the article that we've referenced already, The Road Ahead, which is on Zach's platform, middleclassartist.com. So for those of you who are interested in actually reading the full in-depth article, you can find it in the chat box. But Zach, how did this come to be? Was this something that existed before but really took root now that there was a need for this kind of independent reporting? Or was this the culmination of all of this catalyst of events?
I mean, the short answer is I had a son, and I had to give me a deadline. You know, my son's about almost 14 months old now, and so he had, you know, he was on the way last May, and at the time it looked, I mean, my traveling performing career was, you know, going gangbusters, and I was literally like, I don't know how this is going to work. Like, how do I travel? How do I, you know, what are the new guidelines for my life? And so I just started writing, and, you know, as I started writing, I realized I had a lot more to say about young artist issues, which I've always felt very close to. I mean, I think partially because I came from a financial and economic and political background, where, you know, if I apply to a job, you know, in market research or something, I'll go, okay, well, you know, here's my experience level. I'll go on Glassdoor, I'll sort of see what the salary range is. Okay, that's like around what I'm looking for. Like I'll apply to that company. Whereas like in classical music, it's like the veil of secrecy. It's like, if you are deemed worthy to apply to our beautiful program, you have the opportunity to pay $60 for an opportunity to be auditioned and an opportunity to be, you know, not make any money. And so it's just like, there's a lot of smoke here and mirrors on finance in the arts. And, you know, a lot of words like stipend and honorarium and, you know, things that sort of rub me the wrong way. So, you know, I started looking into it and I realized that like no one else was really doing that at the time. So yeah, the first thing that really kind of hit, went viral, I did a piece on becoming a singer will cost you $1 million if you live in New York. And that was just to go through like cost of living calculations and see like, you know, what can you expect, you know, from a career in the first like 5-10 years, like, you know, to get to a level where you're making, you know, $60,000-$70,000 a year, a normal kind of like middle class-ish life, like what are the sacrifices? And, you know, so like, you know, those were of great interest to me as a new father, and also as a young singer. I'd always been interested in the economic side of things, and from a sense of social justice towards young artists as well. So that's kind of the long answer. The short answer was I had a huge deadline for all the things I wanted to do in my life, and I was like, if I don't start this now, I'm never going to start it. So I basically started it about a year and a bit ago, and yeah, it just took off.
I think that that as a fellow parent, I fully appreciate the fact that there's a time where you know that there's time to do it, and then there's a time where you're like, all right, I hope that I actually put on like, you know, something better non-pajamas today.
Yeah, exactly.
But in terms of singers starting out, I love that you referenced this. It'll cost you $1 million to become a singer. I think that the mystery and the smoke and mirrors that a lot of people not behind the scenes don't necessarily understand is that there is this whole unmeasured length of time that if you're a singer and you get an undergrad degree and a grad degree and maybe like even like, you know, sing for a couple of companies in a row, there's this unmeasurable time that you're referred to as a young artist. And young artists receive what I have a hard time describing under any other terminology as economic abuse. I think that it's very much this, if you do this, you'll gain experience or exposure. Or if you do like all of these things, like help move set pieces, like help build this, help do this, live in a room with like 3 other people, you can play a named character in a show. And there's so much magic of seeing a production, but not necessarily understanding that there's a whole network of singers who are ready and willing to not only work for free because it's so competitive, but they're willing to do things called pay to sings, which the singers on the panel, we're all familiar with that. But Zach, I'd love to hear you speak just a little bit to why are young artists paid so poorly? And why do companies have the ability to take that kind of advantage thus far?
I think the short answer is they're paid poorly because they can be paid poorly. I mean, if you can pay someone $300 a week and they'll accept that job, and the government doesn't step in, and you know your donors aren't asking questions, and your board's doesn't really make a big fuss, and the unions don't make a big fuss, why $15,000 a year if you can? I mean, from a social justice standpoint, it's horrible, but from a company standpoint where they're constantly in the red, you know, and they're always trying to make enough to cover the last show, you know, it makes sense to cut corners where you can. There's definitely a market in pay to sings where there's, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I have something that something that I'd like to add, but I don't want to interrupt right
No, go for it.
now. You're a guest.
Okay.
Sorry.
Either way. Okay, so anyway, what was I saying? Oh yeah, exploitation. Yeah, I mean, there's, you know, the argument for young artist programs and the training is that those people get opportunities that other artists won't, and it will lead to greater exposure, and it will lead to greater economic opportunity down the road. that's totally a legitimate reasoning. That's the reasoning behind a lot of internships. But you know, most people don't do 7 internships. Most people don't spend their entire 20s working for free. You know, it's just a little different than an internship in the sense that you are performing a role that someone could be paid quite a bit of money to perform. You know, like if you're performing a main stage role, could be making, you know, $7,000-8,000 a performance. So you're saving them a lot of money. And so there's
Yeah,
a big.
I would,
Sorry, go
if
ahead.
I could just jump in for a second. I think that also part of the problem, to me, young artist programs seem to be almost entirely like an economic solution, because it seems to, from young artist program to young artist program, there isn't any kind of standard. And usually the relationship is pretty ill-defined. It's like, you're going to get this and you're going to get that. But then it's like, you know, all of a sudden you've worked like, you know, an entire day in rehearsal. You've been in rehearsal the entire week. And it's kind of like, oh, well, we need somebody to perform for these wealthy people so that we can get a donation. And it's kind of like, you're kind of thrown into that type of situation. And it's in addition to like not having the relationship be clearly defined, there really doesn't seem to be any place that a young artist can go to if they are experiencing abuse. And as somebody who works with AGMA, I don't know if AGMA would be an organization. It just kind of seems that AGMA is a little bit out to lunch when it comes to young artists. It's like their main bent is to kind of represent artists that are already full-fledged professionals and kind of dealing with that type of thing. And it seems as if AGMA could have a larger relationship when it comes to giving young artists like the support they need to kind of deal with the difficult situations that they're often in. I mean, what do you think about that as somebody who has experience doing, you know, young artist programs and the like? What do you think about that?
Well, I'm on the board of AGMA, so I can't speak to that, but I can say that every gatekeeper needs to do more to help young artists. Yeah, I mean, there's so much that we can do to help, and step one is just talking about it, publicly. You know, the word call out is negative, but I mean, it's really just drawing attention to the truth. What's happening, you know? I mean, it's literally you're reporting what's happening. So if you're, sorry, go ahead.
I'm so sorry. I feel like I keep interrupting you. I completely agree. I mean, sometimes I wonder about the solidarity in the singing community. Sometimes I wonder about that because, you know, when it comes to the union, when it comes to like the instrumental union, instrumentalists, an entire orchestra of instrumentalists will walk off the stage if they don't get what they want. But somehow singers don't really want to do that. And I wonder sometimes, I mean, not to blame the victim in this situation, because certainly singers have very little power when it comes to the entire equation, but are singers in some way complicit in their own suffering because they oftentimes don't want to be the squeaky wheel, and they don't want to call attention to themselves because they're afraid that they're going to rub somebody the wrong way, and they're afraid that they're going to lose an opportunity. And they know that there are 30 singers behind them. I mean, how can singers, you know, strengthen their solidarity with each other?
Well, I don't think singers are complicit. I think they're correctly judging the risks. We live in a culture of fear and intimidation in our industry. And historically, people who have called out injustice have been, you know, labeled difficult to work with, you know, especially women, when they're labeled that. You know, I'm writing a piece on historical discrimination, and you know, Simon Estes talks about this, where he basically called out a major institution for not hiring Black Americans in a leading role, and he basically never worked there again. So you know, I would say, based on historical precedents, they're correctly judging that if they speak out, they will be silenced. But I think we are living in a significantly different, or at least I hope we are living in a different time, where people are saying what things really are, and they're, you know, looking under the rock and saying, "Ooh, I don't want that." And you know, COVID's really taken the, like, you know, drawn the curtain on a lot of things about a lot of industries. And the idea that, you know, we make all these sacrifices and we do all this, and for what? I mean, we, you know, even people at the top of our industry are broke and looking for jobs. So, you know, maybe one of the only good things that the epidemic has maybe caused is a realization that things can be better and that we have an opportunity to change things. And I think that artists are starting to pick up on that. I understand what you're saying in regard to complicitness of artists who work with certain houses who are afraid to speak out, but I still think even at the top, there's a very imbalanced power dynamic. I don't think, like, Met Opera stars don't have the power that people think they do. I mean, the agent dynamic is different than it is down here, you know, in the weeds. You know, there's a couple of really powerful agents, a couple of really powerful impresarios. And it's just a little different, even for, you know, basically for everyone except for, you know, maybe Renee Fleming. I mean, it's really hard to voice her.
And she has graciously, like, you know, just starting to enjoy her retirement and can, like, now command the rest of the career that she wants. But I'm so glad you mentioned COVID and this pandemic and this time to reframe, tear down old structures, rebuild new structures. I think that the opera world began to start experiencing some of this even pre-COVID, like you mentioned, with the correlation to the Me Too movement and with correlation of just starting to speak up in ways that potentially hadn't been empowered in the past. So I want to pose to you, with the research you've been doing, how do you feel that COVID-19 is going to change the opera world? What do you think that we're going to have to do to, I don't want to say save the art, but essentially, how does this new life form of art exist? In what capacity? And I would assume that part of it is going to be virtual for a time, and then what remains after the new light?
I have to be really careful what I say here publicly.
Of course.
So I wear a lot of different hats. I think that things are going to change for the worse in the United States in terms of artist fees. You know, at least until January, we're looking at a purely digital art world. And from the fees I've been offered, from the absurd fees I've heard for, like, major recitals from, you know, the top of the top, we're talking like 5 cents on the dollar of what we used to make, maybe that. And for way more work. I mean, I currently have a Logitech HD camera. I have lighting and a camera and a microphone. And I didn't have any of this before COVID because I wasn't on Zoom all day. So
you're a one-man opera company.
You have to be. And, like, I've been doing video, audio, visual projects. I had to learn how to do that from scratch. I mean, we are all learning a completely different set of skills that may or may not provide any income. We don't know. That's what everyone else is doing, so we'll have to do it too. So I don't know what the digital world is going to be like, but I know that almost no one is going to be paid a living wage. You know, if we look at a case study of, it's hard not to always go back to the Met, but they have such good data. So, you know, they did this, like, once in a generation fundraiser where every famous opera singer came. They got the chorus, they got the orchestra, everyone to work for free. They got a 6-figure donation from Rolex, and they got free advertising basically from the New York Times and a bunch of other publications. Nothing like that's ever happened, I think, in the history of American opera, where everything, like, they cut out almost all of the labor costs. I mean, they still had to ship very expensive equipment to people, and there were stagehands and videographers and stuff like that, but they cut out, you know, the $10,000 performance people. And they still raised, you know, $3 million, which is great. I mean, like, that's a big thing, but as a percentage of their yearly budget, that's less than 1% of their yearly budget. So that was like the pull out all the stops, call every favor in, like, call every reporter you know, down at the New York Times, and they were only able to raise 1% revenue. And they could only do that by not paying their artists. So like, hundreds of people, I mean, hundreds and hundreds of people were not paid for that project. So that left me very pessimistic about the digital world we're going into, where a company like, say a small Boston opera company who doesn't have 30,000 small donors and who doesn't have Jonas Kaufman to come in at the drop of a hat, I don't know what those people are going to do. And for a while, they were releasing HD content for free. And that has, I think, a slippery downside effect of mid-sized and small orchestras and ensembles who don't have 100 years of HD content featuring Pavarotti and Joan Sutherland and the most famous people who've ever lived in the opera world. And how are they going to charge when the Met, didn't charge anything? So the Met's moving to a pay model now, but we've already had 3 months of unpaid content that people are used to. I understand the model of give a little away and then charge someone something, but like 3 months of free content every day of the highest quality, like how can anybody else compete with that? So I'm very pessimistic about the ability of smaller organizations to raise money online. I was optimistic at the beginning, but just looking at the numbers, I just don't see how it's going to happen. And based on what we know about previous recessions, we know that fundraising numbers are going to go down at least in the Great Recession. I think they went down 6 or 7%, and they took years to go back up. So we're looking at a new digital world where the artists don't really get paid. We're looking at a drop in fundraising, a drop in budgets because they lost the whole season, and in a lot of these companies, some companies have Nashville Symphony canceled through next July. We have all these companies, they're canceling a whole year. They have no product to sell. They have no artists anymore because they're all furloughed. And they have no way to release a new product and no way to market it or put any money into it. So I'm really skeptical of what's going to happen next in terms of artist advocacy. I think we're going to see a big step backward in terms of artist rights. And I'm really, I don't want to say that out loud, but I don't see any other way that this works. When a company loses, like Delta Airlines, for example, they just released their quarterly results and they lost 88% of their revenue still flying. And they've got $6 billion cash on hand or something absurd, and they're still going to have to lay off most of their workers. So probably. So, how is an opera company who takes 9 months off, who has no cash on hand, who has no product, who has no artists, no marketing budget, barely any staff, like how are they, maybe they'll cover their costs, but how can they truly recover? I'm still trying to figure that out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that you touched upon it so nicely in the article that I put into the link of just giving a preparation warning that if you are an independent contracted artist of any amount or percentile of your work, that really we're looking at a time span of just about like a year and a half, 2 years of needing to do other marketable work. And however that might come about, starting to look that far in advance, that's really learning a whole new trade, really. And also learning a trade that can be done safely, because when you think about like singing in the time of COVID, and I think that this is a factor that a lot of universities are like, what are we going to do in the fall, in the spring next year, because they have all of these undergrad majors. Seeing comments in our chat, we see 16,000 graduates of a music program per year. So you think about that multiplied by how many are not of the graduating class. How can singing be done effectively in this year and a half and in these 2 years? Very, very scarily in my mind. Like I think that there's an acknowledgement that has to be made that even if companies find out a way of like quarantining everyone together for 14 days and then live streaming a production, that there's still a risk factor in there of the acknowledgement that singing spreads saliva, that not everyone quarantines the same way. So it's maybe an industry that has different risk factors than something that could be done completely remotely, or something that could be done and take into account like not having to be tactile or in person with other people. So I love that you touched upon that. In terms of preparing for the return, I would love to hear your thoughts on, do you think that this is a call to composers to maybe imagine works that require fewer, or to bring to light works that are more small casted or chamber in response? Like when you think of mounting a production of Aida right now. That seems like terrifying to me with just the sheer number of people on stage. But to mount a work like Laura Kaminsky's As One seems like something that could be done and really keep people isolated and still respect what's on the score page. Do you have thoughts on, are we going to see an artistic shift of content that's being performed?
Yeah, absolutely. Every major technological change in the arts, the medium has, helped in part to determine the message or what's said. To paraphrase, McLuhan and other people, there's, when radio came in, it changed the way people talk. It changed the way things are presented. Radio operas and plays. When TV came and changed the way things are presented. Versus theater, the way we act, what types of things you could shoot, the idea of, and what we can shoot now, understanding with like virtual reality and virtual effects. Like every technological change of our industry has caused a major shift in how we produce art. So I think if someone wants to get their work performed, they're going to have to adjust. And I'm a huge evangelist for new music. I'm commissioning a bunch of new works for my next album. And it's so important to like start from scratch in a lot of ways. And I say this as an early music singer, I really do think we need to reboot the canon in almost every way. I agree. I mean, there are wonderful works by, white dead European men, and I love them to death. But there's other things out there, and some of them can be better staged than a production with elephants. So maybe we should take a closer look at those works. I definitely think there'll be, I think I said in the road ahead in my conclusions that organizations will be forced to work more local and regionally. I mean, we're all assuming you can get on a flight from Geneva and come to New York. Like, there's no guarantee that's going to happen in the next year. I mean, we're being boxed in internationally right now, and we don't know what's going to happen when schools open. That's a whole other topic. But I'm just saying, relying on the things that we used to rely on may no longer be a smart idea. So if you're planning a season, even the idea of a season, like why, it really frustrates me when someone cancels a whole season, because something happening in September is a different risk from something happening in May. Like, I don't know why they have to be packaged together in this world that we're living in. It doesn't make any sense. So I think even rebooting the idea of a season and presenting, short weeks with like alternate weeks you could present it, and offering people 2 tickets and multiple venues and an online component. I mean, there's a lot of ways to do it. Europe is exploring some options, but I definitely think smaller scale works with chamber orchestras, maybe recitals will be able to make money after all this. So who knows? Groups like string quartets and small new music ensembles like the Zone Collective and Eighth Blackbird, I think there's room for them to perform in a lot of different venues. But I do think everything's going to be more local, more regional. There's going to be less relying on star power from Europe, because we may not be able to get those people, and we may not be able to put them up for 14 days because of budget. So yeah, I think a lot of things are how we present music are going to change.
I've got a question when it comes to like administration, because certainly we've been speaking a lot about performers, and they're largely bearing the brunt of all of this. But when it comes to agencies and kind of like the administrators who are involved in kind of like the finer points of casting and things like that, how is this going to affect them? I mean, agencies, if they don't have any artists to kind of put forth, like obviously that's having a large effect on them as well. Like, what do you see as the state of that industry going forward?
Oh man, I do not want to talk on publicly about this, but I will say
so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm making you spill your secrets.
In times of great innovation and change, the people who are in the middle get affected quite a bit. So, and 10% of zero or 15% of zero is zero. So if you're, and it ties back to what I was saying earlier about the artist economy. If you're relying solely on your income based on artist income, like, you're going to have a bad time. Like, we're not going to be making that much money from singing for a while. That's just how it is. As long as we can't perform live in a 80% full auditorium and make our money back at $60, $80 a ticket, like, if we're charging $7.99 for a Met Opera singer, yeah, good. Like you can take 20% of that. But it's going to be really challenging, and you've already seen some agents start to struggle. I've heard some ideas from agencies, including my own, that I'm mildly skeptical of. But in the end, I mean, if companies are hiring based on YouTube videos, I don't, can they just not go to the YouTube? I don't know. It's going to be difficult for anyone who is in the middle between artists and the product for a while, because artists are having a difficult time, and you're taking a piece of a zero pie right now. So I don't know what's going to happen.
I mean, I think we're already seeing in Boston the effect, like you mentioned, of season cancellations. I want to speak a little bit to that. I know that Boston, like many cities, struggles with having proper performance venues. And this is something that the Boston Globe has written about every other year. They're like, when are we going to have an opera house? Or when are we going to have a concert hall that's not Jordan and Symphony? And so I think that the interesting thing that we've been seeing in Boston is that certain venues that have been homes and rented to multiple orchestras and multiple opera companies have made the call until June. And that has forced everyone, regardless of size, to make that choice of, do we cancel everything? Do we cancel the fall and wait on the spring? When is the right time to cancel the spring? And I think that what you said is absolutely correct, that October versus May, we're looking at so many unknown variables that it's really hard to guess this far in advance. So you referenced Europe and that they're starting to explore different options. Can you speak to some of the examples that are starting to pop up?
Sure. I mean, I'm not a European opera singer, but I've noticed a few interesting experiments. Like, I believe there was a Traviata with Lisetta Rapesa and Michael Fabiano and a couple other contacts of mine, and they're doing just fine. I mean, I've seen the pictures on Facebook. It's a little odd, they're all in their little boxes, but it kind of works. It looks like a beautiful production. So Europe's in a totally different position from us, and everyone on Facebook knows it, and everyone in the US who's an artist is just like, oh, why is this happening?
Get here?
I think partially because control over when we can perform is not up to an organization. So how can you be straightforward with your artists and your patrons if I think was it 2 days ago, the Philly mayor just said, hey, we're closing concerts till February. And it was just like, oh, okay, well, that's our company, like you have no control over it. So, clearly that's like a force majeure. But, there's just so much risk and uncertainty in the system right now. And, I get the idea of canceling a whole season, and I understand that there's only, so many venues to present, a 60-person orchestra or something. But I mean, get a couple first chairs together and put a chamber music program on and do some Zoom master classes with students. I mean, there's something you can do, and it's not going to pay, $100,000 for the artist, but it'll pay something, and maybe that'll keep the artist, in your organization, because organizations have to court their artists right now. I mean, you can't expect someone to not make any money for 12, 16, 18 months and say, hey, we're gonna give you a job if we're still around in 2 years from now, so just hang tight. There's no guarantee. There's no guarantee that organization is going to exist. So it's like, if I were an administrator, I would be having Zoom dinners with the first chairs and trying to keep them in their jobs and say, like, what can we do to help? Not just kind of like close the season down with a tweet or whatever happened to a lot of companies or some companies. But that's.
So in terms of your work at the Middleclass Artist, and I love that this is a chance not just for your own research, but for other independent researchers to post articles as well. Can you speak to what other topics that we haven't discussed today that our audience might be able to find on Middleclass Artist, like ethical conversations that are now becoming more more, I don't want to say acceptable, because I think that it depends on what circle you're in, but that these conversations are reaching a larger audience. So what are other topics we might find on Middleclass Artist?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you're referring to, I gave a presentation for NATS, the National Association of Teachers of Singing, on the ethical challenges in the classical music business. And I talked a lot about the issues that we talked about today, about how young artists aren't, given fair wages, and how there's a culture of fear and intimidation. Lots of great positive stuff to read while you're having your coffee. And a couple months ago, I started reporting on a few topics, and I got sort of up to the line, and I was like, okay, I don't know enough about this to like credibly write about it. And so, I've been pulling in people, artists like James Dargan, who I believe is still in Boston.
Yeah.
He wrote a wonderful piece. And this wonderful performer, Ido Hart, wrote a piece about, Andrew Jackson and the $20 bill, and tied in historical elements to the killing of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd. I also have writers talking about unemployment. I've hired multiple people about unemployment because I think it's so important. And, I have another job. I can't talk about it. I don't know a ton about it, but now I know a lot about it. Just the story that artists cannot collect unemployment for some Byzantine reason is a huge story that everyone's talking about. And so I tried to publish some works about that. One of my friends, Sarah, who qualified for $72 a week of unemployment because of how her fees are structured. She's a wage worker sometimes, and she's a 1099 worker sometimes, and in different states, and then she's only worked this amount in this state, and that's where she has to file because blah 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 blah. Just like absurd, Kafka-esque regulations, and things I don't know about that everyone should know about. So those are the kind of things you'll find. I do write a lot about young artist issues. I'm starting to write more about discrimination, particularly against Black people in America. I'm doing a big piece that's coming out on Monday, which I'm not going to ruin it, but spoiler alert, opera is not that good at it.
So we should tune into Middleclass Artist on Monday.
On Monday.
Yeah, I'm running it with Jack Lindbergh, another writer friend of mine. And it's about a certain house, and it'll be fun.
I like the teaser trailer. I think that that's really exciting. As someone who went up and had to pick and choose, like during the young artist time, I'm excited that as artists we're starting to see a lot more transparency in the discussion of. Sarah Rogers actually mentioned it in the comments a little while back. Is that part of that economic pay-in, and part of what you mentioned, Zach, of the upfront, like knowing that you'll get paid later for gigs. For young artists, sometimes it's paying for an audition that doesn't happen. Like it's paying to apply to be heard, and then hearing that they don't want to hear you. So you're out anywhere from $20, $30, $40, $60 multiplied by however many auditions that is. So I love that these conversations of transparency are occurring. Also, the conversation of the independent contracting and how to get unemployment. I think one of the big things that immediately broke down a lot of barriers within my network of colleagues and friends was the fact that we didn't really talk about wages before.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that kind of secrecy of like, especially like, that there is a parity issue of who's willing to work for less. I think that if we all disclose dollar amounts, we would see reflected in the classical music world what we see outside of it, which is that depending on gender, depending on voice type, depending on a lot of factors, like racial identity, I think that we see, if everyone had this amount of transparency, that it's not just a set amount of like, Violetta is paid this amount, Don Ramiro is paid this amount. Like it's very much not in the hands of the artist. So the fact that you've been bringing in so many sources, I think is such a wonderful asset to singers in any part of the country, because we're all dealing with that same struggle of well, I happen to sing in North Carolina, but I file my taxes in Massachusetts, but I had a job that was, you know, on a W-9, like in this state. So now all of that income isn't happening, but all of the forms I'm filling out don't recognize the opposite form of income. So it either looks like you are earning something that you're not, or it looks like you were never employed. All of these problems that it really does take a lot of external guidance of experts in the field. So for anyone who's on the call who's an independent artist, please do check out those other articles mentioned by Zach. The link for his article also lists to the rest of the page. So I hope that you keep that handy, especially for your article coming out. In the next 5 minutes, Zach, I want to open it up to questions from our audience. And I want to kick that off with just a question of my own, which is, if and when we return to some form of singing, do you see the future of middle class artists evolving with the art form? Or do you see it as a, like, the pandemic's over, now I can stop like writing these articles? Is this something that we can expect to see change with the ever-changing potential future of our art?
Yeah, absolutely. It's already started to shift a little bit. You might notice, like my last piece was a video. I'm just getting asked to do all these Zooms, and they require, so not this one, but at the Nats panel. I mean, I spent 25 hours on that presentation, so I was like, I've got to do something with this. And you know, I just did a partnership with Dallas Opera for 4 episodes of the Middleclass Artist, and that was, you know, an audiovisual cartoon about artist fees and like bringing in economic concepts in like a fun little doodle. So I'm very open to shifting and early on in the COVID process, I was just reporting. I was just saying what was happening because nobody else was talking about it. They were, you know, the first couple of weeks when everyone was getting fired by tweets, the news coverage was like, can you believe that we can see this for free on the internet? Wow, here's all, catch, you know, the latest Traviata like for free here. And I'm like, you are a journalist, like talk to people. But anyway, that was a rant. Yeah, so I've shifted away from reporting because, you know, it's very problematic for me to do from my you know, living room. I can't go out and talk to people, and you know, I'm just not as interested in that. I'm more interested in reporting on what I see in the data and what people are doing. So yeah, I definitely see it. I mean, I hate to be a pessimist, but the next step is like, which houses are gonna keep going? So I'll probably talk about that when that happens, and maybe talk about strategies and kind of keep it positive and say, you know, in the nonprofit literature, we've seen like this, and this, and try and make it more researchy. But yeah, I mean, I'm open to pivot to a lot of different things, and I'm going to keep it going because it's allowed me some interesting opportunities as an artist as well. I mean, as I said, I never would have partnered with Dallas Opera as a singer. So yeah, I mean, I've just met some really interesting people doing this. Like I have daily conversations with just totally random people in different states who are, you know, I would have had no possibility of contacting in a normal situation, but they're like, oh, hey, Zach. So, you know, and I can reach out to almost anyone on Facebook in the industry right now, and I know that they'll try and get back to me. So I'll keep using that as a resource. But yeah, I definitely see myself kind of pivoting around.
Well, I'm excited for that. I think that this amount of conversation amongst artists is very enlightening and empowering. I do think that the mindset for singers who went through any form of program that was competition based, which is predominantly most of them, I think that the mentality of helping out someone who could potentially be taking a contract from you was just counterintuitive. It's not what we were necessarily trained and schooled to do. But when you think about the numbers of artists and like you said, that oversaturation point of free content and the devaluing of said content because the ability to watch it and experience it for free, we really do need to start thinking ahead of what do we put out there? How do we support each other? And who's going to use this as an opportunity to change their format of performance? And how can performance take on a not just like a different role, but like a nurturing role, a growing role, and in enlightening role. I love what you mentioned in terms of orchestras and like utilizing your people in smaller amounts. And for me as a music educator, I think that the worst and biggest hiccup that we've ever had for music was the cutting of music education and arts education as a whole. So we see that those cuts that happened late 80s, early 90s, then when money started becoming available for the arts, schools legit did not know what to do with it. And so they started bringing in independent contracts to build a music program, but then not necessarily understand the value of music education. And we see that trickle into like which demographics buy tickets to things, which do not, because they probably weren't exposed at a younger age. They probably didn't learn how to listen to it, how to appreciate it. So I'm with you. I hope to see a lot of reframing of how to make all of this art approachable, accessible, but still valued, and also a chance to maybe recognize that not all artists are being given an equal footing to get their art displayed and performed. So I'm excited about that. If you do have a question for Zach, you are invited to either turn on your camera and you can ask yourself. I would love to have you join the conversation, or you can feel free to put it in the chat box and then have it be just an open dialogue if you're maybe feeling shy or you're in your jammies, which I totally appreciate. I think that sometimes we go onto those Zoom calls and we're like, the top half of me is ready for work. And so if you're feeling a little shy, feel free to put it in the chat box. And if you're feeling like you want to come to the forum and come to the table, please do turn on your camera. Hi, Sherry. For those of you who don't know, but I'm sure many of us do, Sherry Snow is the executive director of NEMPAC. Sherry, welcome to the forum.
Thank you so much. Thank you guys so much. This is really great and helpful. Zach, I have a question about more so the art form. You know, classical music and opera, I think we've been challenged with building our audiences, and I feel like the focus has been, how do we build our audience? How do we share opera with these younger generations? And now we're in this kind of standstill moment where we're not creating new art. And, you know, these younger generations are not getting that exposure and that experience. So, you know, can you talk to a little bit of, you know, when we do return, hopefully in the future, you know, how will this change how opera companies are also approaching like building their audiences and sustaining the actual art form, which is therefore obviously impacting the artist, and then what that means to being an artist and being, you know, more versatile in terms of genre, what you're performing. I mean, they both go kind of hand in hand, but what's your take on that?
I think, you know, thank you for your question, Sherry. That's really interesting. I think as, you know, as I said in the last, you know, over the next 9 months, we're really looking at a digital opera world. I know it's more, your question is more about after that, but it's hard to see after that right now. So I'll start with that and then I'll see where I go. And I think, you know, artists, there's going to be sort of an artist as influencer thing going on, because opera companies just don't have reach on social media that a lot of people do. You know, like a very famous singer at the Met has probably 10 times the reach of like a middle range orchestra, and a middle range orchestra doesn't have money for Facebook ads right now or Instagram clicks or whatever you need to get your message out, because, you know, social media has basically a tax on information where you have to pay them to get it seen. You know, so I think the balance of power is going to shift a little towards artists as influencers. You're seeing, you know, young artists kind of recognize that through platforms like YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and kind of build their brand. And I know everyone hates the word brand, but it really is a brand. I mean, we all have our, like, my artist brand is like, I'm an early music dude and artist advocacy, and I write and I talk about young artist issues, and like that's everything I write about on the internet is about that. So you know, I basically think that it's going to rely, companies are going to have to rely a lot more on artists to get people to show up. Whereas, you know, as was read very laboriously in my bio, I did a lot of messiahs, and I would do these messiahs, and the advertising wouldn't have anybody's names. And, I would come back in 2 years and no one would remember me. And I couldn't reach out to an audience member and I couldn't connect with that person who they liked my solo or whatever. So I think opera companies and artists, or whatever types of arts companies and artists, are going to have to work hand in hand on the marketing. The idea that an artist can just sort of like quietly show up and sing their aria and go home, I think that era is done. I don't see that ever happening again. I think social media reach is going to be really critical, and I know everyone hates that idea, but that's just where we are, because it's literally like the world where like there is no other way to produce music right now. So anyway, after that, I think I agree with what you were saying and what Alexandra and others were talking about different types of ensembles, being flexible. I mentioned it in my road ahead conclusion as well. I think I wrote back in March that the singer's gonna have to pick up a lot of different skills. And it's not necessarily, it's a requirement now, basically. And they're going to have to be very flexible. I am an early music singer, but I also do new music. I do recitals. I do anything someone pays me for, I will sing if I can sing it. So, being able to be flexible like that and reading, absurdly difficult music, and being able to do that quickly. So a lot of the secondary skills that we sort of left in conservatory, like sight reading, your training, piano performance, those things are ironically going to be a lot more important as we can't afford or can't see our coaches. So yeah, just like a combination of things, definitely a lot more flexibility, a lot more working local and regionally, and artist partnerships with companies to promote and market the product.
I have a quick question. You mentioned the importance of kind of the artist as an influencer and the importance of social media kind of going forward. And I'm sure everybody here is like me in the sense that they have this love-hate affair with social media. You had a really fantastic article on the blog by Bryce McClendon about social media and what's not taught in schools, and kind of conflicting messages that, advice that you get from professors and you get from other artists and people that you respect about how one should conduct oneself on social media. And is there, do you have any advice for any young artists who are maybe kind of weighing that question and kind of not sure when they cross the line and they go into something that's too personal, but they still want to be authentic to their brand, and how to kind of reconcile those issues that some artists are struggling with right now?
Absolutely. Social media is toxic. It affects our brains in ways we still don't understand. It causes anxiety and depression among younger demographics, like young artists who always seem to be getting the short end of the stick. And it's very challenging to be on there a lot. I take frequent breaks. I'm pretty much never am on there on the weekends unless I have to do some Zoom thing. And I'm always say in the evenings, I do my writing, I hang with my son. The weekends, I hang with my wife and my son. Don't talk to me, basically. And that's the way that I deal with it. But I know everyone is different, and I also deal with anxiety and depression like many young singers. I'm not even young anymore, 36 or whatever. But I think the Bryce's article you mentioned, I think he called it instead of talking about personal things, just what's private. And everyone kind of has if you'll notice, there's not a single picture of my son on any of my Facebook feeds. I'm very careful to separate church and state in the sense of my personal life that way. But my feelings about the business, I would be more than happy to record a video about how upset I am about the fact that I lost 11 gigs and here's a sad song, which I have done. So I think everyone kind of has their own way to do it while staying kind of truthful to themselves. And I think you definitely have to protect yourself mentally from just the constant stream of bad news, and maybe just find a little corner of the internet that's civil. I have a little forum that I'm administrator of, where we just have civil discussions about music, and there's not people yelling at each other, and we just talk, check in, see how people are doing in their mental health. So just find a little corner of the internet that's not super toxic, and kind of base there, and then branch out when you can.
I respect that a lot. I appreciate the fact that this is bringing to light, I think, like you said, another plight for young singers is that for those of us who are, I don't know, Zach, I'm turning 35 in a week, so I still think of us as young at heart artists, maybe. But that but I definitely appreciate the fact that there are a lot of unknown variables of, I put out a video of myself performing, I only got X amount of likes. So we are dealing with this, not only oversaturation of the market, but also how does it impact us internally? And how does that then impact us in the future in our art? Like, am I going to be scared to put any content out? Am I not going to make recordings? Am I not going to apply to X amount of like opportunities, or, you know, submit myself for X amount of opportunities? But what I love that you mentioned is that there is a little bit of an onus for the artist for advocating a work if they're working in conjunction with either an orchestra, a company, an organization. And this is something that, working as the artistic director for NEMPAC Opera, that I'm seeing a big pivot in. And I think that Sherry would agree with me that we're seeing an era where we are noticing that our artists have a following that is to that artist, and that is something that houses and organizations need to take into account. And so having that online brand only really makes you more marketable. If we know that, like, that's an artist who's putting out a brand of, like, I'm intelligent, or I'm innovative, or I'm exciting, or I'm really good at Insta stories, so I'm interesting. Like, if there's somebody that has like this fluidity down for online branding, it really is beneficial to a company that maybe, like you said, was used to having Messiah posters with no soloist names, which to me is so like, you know, surprising that model can still exist anywhere, because the first thing I do when I see someone's doing a Messiah is I'm like, all right, who's the alto?
Yeah.
Like, I think that's
the B section of
yeah, we all do that, right?
But I want to pass it over to a wonderful question from Sarah Rogers in our chat feed. And as Sarah is mentioning in her question, like, all of these plights of the young artists very much impact her. So, to quote, "As someone who is going into their second year of their master's this fall, yikes, do you have thoughts on how young artists should approach entering this field post-COVID? Are there things that you feel young artists should prepare for that maybe weren't necessarily there before? Like a skill set that maybe our generation got away with not having, that, like, anyone entering, like, you know, I don't want to say abandon hope, all ye that enter, but like maybe like retraining ourselves ahead of time. What are some of those skill sets?"
Yeah. Thanks for the question, Sarah. This is really important. So skill sets and what you should prepare for, I feel like, are two different things. What I would prepare for is that you don't have to fly to New York all the time, and that living in a high cost of living city is going to become less relevant. So I would try and find a place to hunker down where your cost of living is pretty low, say, you know, if you're lucky, your parents' house, or somewhere where you can get to a gig, but, you know, living, like, before COVID, I would say you want to build out local, regionally, and nationally. You want to get a church gig. You want to do small opera companies local. You want to maybe do a couple moonshot auditions, like for young arts programs and, you know, for agents. But, you know, try and keep your expenses down. But when you know, the world we're living in now, none of those things may be happening for the next, you know, year, so, or potentially longer. So it's really hard to recommend that strategy. But part of that strategy in terms of keeping your cost of living down, I think is still valid. As terms of skills, almost everything I write on Middleclass Artist is sort of designed to get people to build a second set of skills. And not in a like tone deaf, like go get another job, like some professional famous people have said this week. but in a way that's like, okay, so like we're all smart here. We all have multiple skills. Like, some people are really good at writing. Some people are like extraordinarily convincing in a conversation. Some people are like have an excellent kind of analytical brain. Like, any coach who can play the piano and sing in German while sight reading or something can do something analytical, so not be opposed to having being able to do two things at once. And the honest truth is that for the first little while, there isn't really a full-time singing thing. Like, you are not doing that full-time. Like, you can practice a couple hours a day. You can chase down leads a couple hours a day. That's what I basically do when I'm home. Like, for instance, my life pre-COVID is structured. I get up with my kid. I work 7 to 3, and then I practice in the afternoon and do business development until 5. I hang out with my kid, have dinner with my wife, and then I write in the evenings. And that's like, it's always a long day. But that's what you can expect, basically. So I would say definitely you should be set up to be able to do two things at once, because you're always, even as a full-time singer, you have to be constantly learning the next role in your hotel room while you're doing that role. I mean, like, you're gonna be juggling things anyway. So while you're not juggling anything, I would recommend there's just a wealth of free educational content on the internet, on like edX, Udacity, things I use all the time. I'm actually taking a calculus course right now, but I know. But I'm just trying to keep my options open. But yeah, I mean, just like explore other stuff that you can for free, and just kind of see, like, nothing's going to excite you as much as singing right now, because the entry level at something else just kind of is not great no matter what. It doesn't, even singing entry level is not great. Like, young artist programs are really hard, and they're fun, but they're not, I wouldn't consider them like enjoyable in the sense that, that's what I would want to do with my free time for the rest of my life. But you do that in order to get to a goal. So, just the first couple things you might get in another career, they might not be perfect. But just understanding that, like, you can't make a living from singing alone for the next little while. And so, like, what else do you like to do? What else are you passionate about? Just kind of like see where that goes over the next year while you're in school, like, if you have a light day, like, just pursue something, like write something, like write a piece and submit it to me, or write something about the business, or create a podcast or something just for fun, like see where that goes, just like try a new project. And like I had no idea that Middleclass Artist was going to lead to anything. Like, all I was doing was writing about the business, and I was like, who's gonna, like, I spent 50 hours researching young artist programs in my spare time for my first young artist program article. I wrote about, and I went through over 75 990 forms in my spare time. That's what I like to do. That's not what you like to do, probably. That's fine. But I enjoy it because I'm like, whoa, that's interesting. You didn't talk about that, did you? So you just find some other thing and just like take a look at it. And you don't have to monetize everything. I'm not going to monetize Middleclass Artists, really. Like, it's important that it stays a thing for young singers. So it doesn't always have to be about the money, but just see where it goes. Just find something else and see where it goes at the same time. It's not a day job and it's not giving up. It's just a reality that you're not going to make any money at music for a while.
You mentioned something in your Nats talk, in your article that you did for your blog, and it was this idea that it's really going to once everything kind of opens up and we go back to quote unquote normal, it's going to be the singers that have managed to kind of survive up until that point. So I guess one of the things that I think about when it comes to my own singing is just like kind of this idea that just planning for the long road, planning that things are going to happen later than you think that they are, and just making sure that you're ready and you're keeping up your skills, because that alone is very challenging to do, because I've heard from so many colleagues, it's like, gosh, I just don't feel like singing right now, with everything that's going on in the world and, this whole situation, I just don't feel like singing. But it's going to be kind of like a longevity type of thing, that we're just going to have to be able to keep ourselves going for, like, who knows, but longer than we all think that we're going to. Just a comment. I
Absolutely.
Did not have a question. I just realized at the end of that, I did not.
No, I totally agree. I think, it's going to be less about who has the best voice and who's going to be around in 2 years.
Yeah.
I do have a question though, and this is not from the point of view of the singer side of my brain, but this is from the point of view of the work that you've done talking about how different companies responded to their artists. So without any specificity, without naming any names, can you give advice to companies that might have contracted artists right now on ways not to treat their contract? What would you say would be a nice example of, I need to invoke canceling your contract, and let's say that there is a force majeure clause in it? What are don'ts?
Stay off social media.
So don't like cancel your season on social media before contacting your artists.
Yeah, it's very telling where priorities are if you contract your patrons first. Because, you know, I talked about this in my ethics talk. You know, it's a moral, it's a moral imperative we have to protect like the poor and the vulnerable in our society. And it's not supposed to be just, okay, everyone go for it and whoever gets the most money wins. That's not how we're supposed to run our society, especially not an arts program. And, you know, there is this sort of like all blank matter argument that comes up where it's like, well, you know, we don't want the patrons to get upset and lose their money on this, and they'll get annoyed and they won't give us money. And like, we also have to keep our own thing running, and like, you know, administrators are affected too. And like, you know, that's all true, but where you go first is the priority. It shows your priority. So, you know, who is the most affected in a situation like force majeure? It's the independent contractor who spent all their money learning the role and coaching it, who probably paid for their own ticket up front a lot of the time, who has to cover an Airbnb, who might even be in the middle of a rehearsal. Like, some people were force majeured in the middle of rehearsal and they were not paid. Like, major houses. So that, even just thinking about that gets me upset, because that's just thousands of dollars we pay up front on our credit cards. So I would just say, like, understanding that artists bear most of the risk in general, and like respecting that. And obviously, like, just have a conversation with your artist. And I mean, after my 11th force majeure, it's not like I was like, oh my God, how did this happen? Like, I knew it was coming. It's just like, come on, you know, just pick up the phone. Like, there's only 12 people involved in this. Like, you don't have to send a form letter to my agent. Just like, give me a call. You have my number. I have your number. Like, but I can't call them and be like, hey, are you invoking force majeure on me? And I certainly can't call them and be like, I'm invoking force majeure on you, sucker. Even the fact that you're laughing should balance the powers.
It's only for me like an opportunity to release how truly stressful it was being on the end of being an artistic director. And the behind the scenes that you just mentioned is an aspect that I think that it's very hard to see the entire iceberg of a company. I think that we get to see like the very performative side of companies, but like you mentioned, administration, rental fees, all of these other contracts that are like, you know, hidden in paperwork out of sight of like the singer or the, you know, the trombonist or whomever. And so when we're looking ahead at how to handle things, I think that it is so important to learn from what went wrong. But I do think that it's also important to highlight, and I love that you did this, companies that did it right. And I want to give my own personal shout out to the Metropolitan Chorale of Brookline, whom is by no means a large company in the scope of national music, but is definitely a choral society in the greater Boston area that paid out every single artist contract for 3 concerts that were canceled for over the course of their season, but that we were at our dress rehearsal for the first of those 3. And we had to make a choice. And I knew that when we had our dress rehearsal and we recorded it, like inside I was like, we're not coming back for a concert. It's not happening. Like, there were so many, like, we have plan A, plan B, plan C. But then when it came down to it, an organization of their size, I didn't necessarily expect anything, but there wasn't a force majeure clause in my contract.
Mm-hmm.
And I went back just to kind of check. And in my head, I was like, okay, like I do have legal standing, but
You're never
I
gonna hit
also
them.
wouldn't hold it against them just because they're not huge. They don't have deep pockets. They definitely like have a, you know, an audience and generous donors, and they're wonderful colleagues. But then every single artist of the 4 artists in residence, myself included, was paid out for the rest of the concerts on the season. And I looked to actions like that, and I do think that that is some kind of symbol of what you said, that there is this, it's not like Monopoly, and that's why most of our families ban us from playing it. It's not like got the most contracts, got the most bucks, I win. But it's really about that, you know, network of colleagues that you want to either refer to someone else or return and work with again. And so to highlight what did go well, I think that companies that have had a chance to acknowledge work already done and potentially paid a percentile of work done. That was what NEMPAC was able to do with our design and our tech team. That there was already, like, we hadn't started rehearsals, we hadn't even announced our cast for our one main stage, but that we had done work behind the scenes with our conductor, with our director, with some of our design team. I think that acknowledging that, if you're able to, is so crucial to, if and when we're up and running and all of us have survived this, to still be active performing in our fields. It's so crucial to remember who treated you human and who treated you.
I'm keeping track.
Yeah, it does matter.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, and if I can, I'm going to do my own shout out for Boston Lyric Opera. We were all in the middle of final rehearsals for Norma, and we had our invited dress, to which everyone was canceled, and it was just us, and we did this invited dress for no one, and we recorded it. And I have a union contract, and I was just like, this is just going to be lost money. But the company, to their credit, paid all of us, and, you know, and we're very gracious about the whole thing. And I really feel, I mean, there are certain particular church jobs. I mean, there's some places who have no money, who made sure that their singers were taken care of. And there are some very large organizations that should have had the money set aside and made a big deal about not paying their people. And it really is telling about the type of relationship you have with that person, and whether or not you're going to feel that you can come back and want to work for them again. And it's information. It's, you know, good, bad information. It's information that you can use and go forward. But it has been very telling. I find that to be true.
I think that there's a certain degree of like lifting the rug and seeing the pile of dirt. I think that like we're exposing a lot. So for my purposes of advocacy and staying a follower of your work, I'm very excited for what comes out on Monday. I'm very excited for also those on our call to check out in our chat box. I did put the link to your Nats talk on ethical challenges in the classical music business for those who wish to watch the video and to find out a little bit more in depth about what Zach presented to the National Association of Teachers of Singing. But Zach, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I think that not only was this enlightening, but to me, this was a very cathartic time of just hearing that none of us are alone, that we are all going through this together, and that it is possible to take one of our like multitude of talents and skills and things that we have as an analytic ability, and to repurpose them. For myself, for some reason, everyone wants to take ukulele lessons, but no one wants to take voice lessons. And I'm okay with that. I don't know what, this is its own little research project for me, but the uptick in people taking up ukulele, like, I'm glad that of all the instruments, that's seeing the most beginning and intermediate students wanting to advance. But just thank you so much for those who have joined us today in our audience. This will be made available as a link on the nempacboston.org website for future viewing if you wish to return and remind yourself or refresh yourself of points that Zach covered. And also, please join us in 2 weeks' time when our guest will be Dana Varga of The Empowered Musician. And Zach mentioned Dana by first name, but for those of us in Boston, we know that Dana means Dana Varga, who is a wonderful soprano and voice pedagogue and on the faculty of Longy. And the work she's been doing is similar but different to the work that Zach is doing in terms of really giving advocacy and a platform for amplifying voices of singers and artists. So we're very excited to explore the topic of conversation of toxicity in terms of voice-teacher relationships and company relationships with Dana. And we hope that all of you will join us in 2 weeks' time on Thursday at 5:30 again. Thank you so much, Zach.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you, Zach. So great to meet you.
You too. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.